The October wind tears through the empty streets of Boston like a fist wrapped in barbed wire, and Sofia Hartley staggers through it with one eye swollen shut, her lip split open and bleeding into the collar of her jacket, handprint bruises mapped across her throat in shades of purple and black. The cold burns against her exposed skin, but she does not feel it anymore. She has moved beyond pain into something else entirely, a numb, mechanical forward motion that is all her body knows how to do. Her breath comes in shallow gasps, visible in the dark air like smoke from a dying fire. The grocery bag in her left hand weighs nothing and everything all at once: 2 boxes of pasta, a carton of milk that cost her nearly $4, a single rotisserie chicken on sale for half price because it was going to expire at midnight. $12 for dinner for her and Emma. $12 that came from a wallet containing exactly $78.32. That is all the money she has left in the entire world. The eviction notice crackles in her jacket pocket, the red deadline screaming silently against her ribs: 12 days. 12 days until the locks change. 12 days until there is no home for Emma to come back to after school. She does not cry anymore about things like this. Crying is a luxury for people who have options. A sound stops her. Footsteps. Multiple people, moving fast, their voices low and urgent, coming from the alley that cuts between the warehouse district and the waterfront docks. She knows these streets. She walks them at 3 in the morning on her way home from her shift at Rose's Diner, where the manager, Brad, calls her sweetheart in a way that makes her skin crawl and stiffs her on tips because she did not smile enough while serving his friends. $3 in a $14 tab. That happens almost every night. Sofia hears a man's voice, small and terrified, begging in a language she does not recognize. Then larger voices, cruel and amused. The sound of a body hitting a wall. She does not think. She turns toward the alley and walks straight into it, her swollen eye making everything sideways and strange. What emerges from the darkness becomes clear only when she is already moving toward it: 2 men in dark suits, expensive ones, the kind that cost more than her rent used to cost, standing over a vendor in a blood-stained white coat. The vendor is maybe 60 years old, skin like weathered leather, his produce cart overturned on the pavement with oranges and apples scattered everywhere like abandoned children. One of the men, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his jaw to his collarbone, is holding the vendor against the warehouse wall by the fabric of his shirt. The other, younger, with pale eyes and a diamond ring on his pinky finger, is laughing. Not smiling. Laughing with the sound of breaking glass. "Please," the vendor says, his accent thick and desperate. "Please, I have nothing. I have a family. I am paying back what I owe. 3 weeks, I promise. 3 weeks, Anne." 3 weeks is too late, the taller man says, and his voice lands in the space between them like something heavy dropping. "Tony." The pale-eyed man rolls up his sleeve. Sofia does not calculate odds or consequences. She steps directly into the space between them and the vendor, and her body, small, fragile, held together by coffee and spite, becomes a wall. Blood from her lip drips onto the wet pavement in a small dark circle. "Stop," she says. Her voice is barely there, a whisper that should not carry weight, should not matter. But it does. The 2 men freeze. The pale-eyed one's hand drops. Silence rushes in like a tide. From the shadows of the warehouse entrance, a man emerges. He moves without hurrying, each step deliberate and measured, the way someone walks when they know the entire world has already arranged itself around their arrival. He is tall, easily 6'2", and broad in a way that speaks of expensive training, expensive food, expensive everything. His suit is charcoal gray, the kind of tailored perfection that costs more than Sofia's entire monthly income. White shirt unbuttoned slightly at the neck, revealing skin that has never had to work in the rain. Gold watch on his left wrist, the kind of timepiece that requires apology when you wear it in public. His hair is dark, almost black, and his eyes are darker still. Storm gray eyes, the kind that seem to contain their own weather system. A scar runs from his right temple to his cheekbone, and rather than softening his face, it only sharpens it. Makes it look like something carved from stone by someone with very specific instructions about what danger should resemble. Aleandro Castellano is 34 years old and already responsible for more territory, more money, and more violence than any man should carry in a single lifetime. He runs Boston's underworld not because he wanted to, but because his brother, Marco, his younger brother, the one he raised after their mother died, had chosen money over family. Had chosen to betray the entire organization to a rival family out of New York for a sum that barely qualified as significant. Had forced Aleandro to choose between mercy and survival. He had chosen survival. That was 5 years ago. Now Aleandro moves through the world like a man who has already died once and found the experience disappointing. He looks at the small, bleeding woman standing between his lieutenant and a vendor who owes money he will never pay back. He looks at how her entire body is trembling, not from cold but from fear she is attempting to hide. He looks at her one good eye, which is still blazing with something that resembles fury more than terror. Something in his chest, something he thought had calcified beyond feeling, recognizes itself in that eye. "Stand down," he says to Tony and Franco. His voice is low, the kind of command that does not require volume because the world has learned to listen when it speaks. Tony steps back immediately. Franco takes longer, but he moves. Sofia does not move. She does not step aside. She simply stands there, blocking the vendor with her body, and her shoulders shake from the effort of not collapsing. The cut on her lip opens again, and a fresh line of blood traces down her chin. "What is your name?" Aleandro asks. She does not answer. "What happened to you?" She still does not answer, but her hand moves to her throat, touching the bruises there as though they are evidence of something she cannot quite bring herself to explain. And they are handprints. Large ones. A man's hands, squeezing until stars appeared at the edges of her vision, until she could not breathe, until she could not scream. Aleandro steps closer, and the smell of his cologne, something expensive and dangerous, like leather and smoke, fills the space between them. His eyes move from her swollen eye to the bruises on her throat to the grocery bag still clutched in her trembling hand. A chicken. Pasta. Milk. He has killed men for less than what he can see written across this woman's body. The vendor behind her speaks in a small voice. She is kind. I have seen her before, on the streets. Always helping people who cannot help themselves. Always broken herself. Sofia's shoulders tense even further. What is your name? Aleandro repeats, and this time it is not a question. It is a demand wrapped in something almost gentle. Sofia, she whispers. My name is Sofia Hartley. Behind them, the warehouse district holds its breath. The November wind dies down for just a moment, as though the entire city is listening, waiting to understand what happens next. Somewhere in the darkness, the sound of a siren echoes in the distance, moving away. A clock on a nearby building strikes 3 times, the sound hollow and final. Aleandro Castellano looks at this woman, Sofia Hartley, 31 years old, 40 pounds underweight, carrying groceries home to a daughter who is waiting for her, who has no idea that her mother's ribs are cracked from a man's fists, who has no idea that the eviction notice in her mother's pocket means everything is about to collapse into nothing. And in that moment, he sees something he has not seen in 5 years of ruling an empire built on violence and control. He sees someone worth saving. Before he can speak, sirens break the silence, closer now, and the moment fractures like glass. Now, let us go back. Let us understand how Sofia Hartley arrived at this moment, bleeding, desperate, standing between armed men and the last shred of her courage. Let us begin at the beginning, when everything was not falling apart, when she still believed she could survive this alone. 12 hours earlier. The morning light filtered through gaps in the apartment's broken blinds, casting thin bars across Sofia Hartley's face as she lay awake on a mattress that had lost its shape somewhere around 2008. She was 31 years old. The mirror above her dresser said she looked 50. Her daughter Emma slept curled against her side, 6 years old and still small enough to fit in the space between Sofia's ribs and the wall. The child's breathing was steady, innocent, unaware that her mother had been awake since 4 a.m. doing arithmetic on the inside of a grocery receipt with a pencil stub. Sofia's hand trembled as she counted the bills from her wallet for the 5th time that morning. $17. 17. She had worked a double shift yesterday, 14 hours on her feet carrying plates that weighed less than the exhaustion in her bones, and this was what remained after paying the electric bill 2 days late. Emma needed new shoes. The one she wore had cardboard stuffed inside where the sole had separated from the leather. The teacher had called twice about it. Sofia had cried in the bathroom at the diner after that call, standing in a stall that smelled like industrial cleaners and human despair, wondering if this counted as neglect. If Douglas found out she couldn't afford shoes for their daughter, he would use it in court. He would stand before a judge and say Sofia was unfit, that Emma needed to live with him instead, that a man with money could provide what a waitress with nothing could not. The thought made her stomach clench. She pulled Emma closer, breathing in the strawberry smell of the dollar store shampoo, and did the math one more time. $17 today. $43 until payday on Friday. Milk cost $3. Eggs, $2.50. Bread, $1.20. If she bought only the cheapest things, only the things that could stretch across for days, she could make it work. She had made it work before. She would make it work again. But there was also the eviction notice. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like a predator sleeping with one eye open. She had opened it 3 times, read the same words, and each time they arranged themselves in the same impossible configuration. $35,000. That was what the building's new owner wanted. The mortgage had sold to a development company, and the company had sent notices to every tenant. Pay the back rent and penalties that had accumulated under the previous landlord, or vacate within 12 days. 12 days. The number was written in red ink, as though the paper itself was bleeding. 12 days and nowhere to go. Sofia dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, pulling on the waitress uniform she had worn for shifts a week for 2 years. The polyester was faded from navy to something closer to ash. The name tag that read Sofia was held on with a safety pin after the original clasp had broken last month. She had not replaced it because replacement name tags cost $6 at the uniform shop, and $6 was milk and eggs and hope stretched too thin. Emma woke as Sofia braided her hair, the child's small fingers reaching up to touch her mother's face. "Mama, you're sad again," Emma said. 6 years old and already reading sorrow like other children read picture books. "I am not sad," Sofia said, and smiled so hard her face ached. "I am just tired. Work was busy last night." "Everyone else's mamas don't work at night," Emma said. It was not a question or an accusation. Just a fact she had noticed, catalogued, tried to understand. Sofia's hand stilled in her daughter's hair. "No, sweetheart. Some mamas work during the day. Some work at night. We all do the best we can. Is Douglas coming this weekend?" The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Douglas. Emma's father. The man who had held Sofia by the throat against a kitchen wall and asked her why she was making him so angry, as though her breathing was a personal insult. The man whose hands had left marks like maps of continents on her skin. The man who had discovered her new apartment address somehow, who showed up at the diner at closing time with flowers and apologies and threats wrapped so tightly together that Sofia could not tell where one ended and the other began. "I do not know yet, baby," Sofia said. "We will see." But the truth was that Douglas had called 4 times yesterday. The diner's manager, Ramon, had warned her each time, his voice tight with a concern he never put into words. Douglas's messages had progressed from sweet to angry to threatening to sweet again, cycling through them like seasons. He missed Emma. He missed Sofia. He needed to talk to her about custody. He had friends at the police department. He had lawyers. He had resources. He would see her soon, whether she wanted him to or not. Sofia finished braiding Emma's hair with shaking hands and helped her into the one outfit she had without stains or tears. They rode the bus to Emma's school, and Sofia paid for the fare with coins she had saved from the tips customers left in quarters and dimes. At the school gate, a mother Sofia recognized stood with a boy in Emma's class. The woman's car was parked behind her, a silver sedan that had probably cost more than Sofia's entire year's wages. The woman looked at Sofia's worn coat and Emma's taped shoes and then looked away, the way people do when they encounter something too uncomfortable to acknowledge. "Bye, Mama," Emma said, and wrapped her arms around Sofia's waist. Sofia held her daughter the way a person holds something they are terrified of dropping. When she finally let go, Emma's small hand slipped away reluctantly, and Sofia watched her disappear into the school building, joining the stream of children in clean uniforms and new backpacks. Some of them had lunch boxes with cartoon characters printed on them. Emma had a plastic container with a crack down one side. The walk to the diner took 40 minutes. Sofia's shoes had begun to split at the heel, and each step sent a small shock of pain up her leg. The October wind moved through Boston streets like something with teeth, and she pulled her coat tighter, feeling the chill in her bones. Somewhere above the city, clouds were gathering, piling up like the problems Sofia could not solve, and she walked faster, trying to outrun the weather, though she knew it was pointless. The diner was already busy when she arrived at 10:24 a.m. Ramon was behind the counter, and he gave her a look that said everything without words. Sofia tied on her apron and began taking orders, moving through the restaurant with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing something so many times that her body moved on muscle memory while her mind lived somewhere else entirely. At noon, a woman Sofia recognized walked in. Not from the diner. From somewhere else. The woman had a sharp face and sharper eyes, and she was looking at Sofia with a kind of focus that made the back of Sofia's neck tighten. The woman ordered a salad with no dressing, black coffee, and water. As Sofia set down the plate, the woman smiled. "You are Sofia Hartley," she said. "Not a question." Sofia's hand jerked slightly, nearly spilling the water. "Yes? I am Cordelia Blackwood. I knew Douglas. We had some business together, years ago." The smile widened. "He has spoken about you. About Emma. He seems very invested in his daughter's future. He mentioned you have been making custody difficult. That you are not letting him see her." Sofia's mouth had gone dry. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Of course you do," Cordelia said, and took a sip of her black coffee. "He also mentioned that you were having trouble keeping your apartment. Such a shame. A child needs stability. A judge would notice if a mother could not provide a home." Sofia walked away before she could hear more. Her hands shook as she delivered other orders. In the kitchen, Ramon looked at her face and asked if she was all right. She said yes. She said it with such certainty that they both knew it was a lie. At 2:13 p.m., Douglas called. Sofia took the call in the storage room behind the kitchen, sitting on a crate of canned tomatoes. "I miss you," he said. His voice was soft, almost tender. This was the version of Douglas that confused her most. "I miss both of you so much. Emma needs her father. You know I would never hurt either of you. I was just going through something. I am better now. I want to come see her this weekend." "No," Sofia said. "Sofia." His voice changed. The softness cracked like ice. "You are not going to keep my daughter from me. I have lawyers. I have witnesses who can testify that you are unstable. I have friends at the station who can make life very difficult for you if you do not cooperate." Sofia hung up. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. By the time her shift ended at 10 p.m., Sofia had made $17 in tips and had been reminded by a customer that she had forgotten to refill their water glass 3 minutes earlier. She walked home in the dark, carrying a bag of day-old bread and dented cans that Ramon had given her, things the diner was going to throw away anyway. The streets of Boston were empty at this hour, just her and the cold and the terrible mathematics of survival. At home, she stood in her kitchen and looked at the eviction notice one more time. 12 days. She had 12 days to find $35,000 that did not exist, or find a new apartment she could not afford, or give up and watch everything collapse. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her freeze. The October wind howled through the empty streets of Boston like something with teeth, carrying the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Sofia Hartley stood at the entrance to the warehouse district at 11:44 p.m., her right eye swollen purple and rimmed in yellow, her throat mapped with 5 distinct finger marks where Douglas's hands had found her that morning. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth, dark and rust-colored against her skin. In her jacket pocket, $78 in crumpled bills pressed against her ribs, all she had left after rent, after Emma's school supplies, after the medication the clinic had said she needed but could not afford. The eviction notice burned against her other pocket in bold red ink. 12 days. 12 days to find $35,000 or lose the apartment and lose Emma to a system that would say she was unfit. She had witnessed 3 armed men in black coats moving toward a vendor at the corner, backing him into the narrow space between buildings. The vendor was small, frightened, his hands raised as their voices dropped to something dangerous. Without thinking, which was the thing about desperation, it burned away all the careful calculations of survival. Sofia stepped directly into their path. She pushed the smaller man behind her shoulders, her voice shaking but steady. "He does not have what you want. Whatever this is, he is not the right person." The men had frozen. They were not used to being challenged by women with black eyes and torn sleeves. But it was the 4th man, the one who emerged from the warehouse shadows, who had stopped time entirely. Aleandro Castellano was 6'2", dressed in a 3-piece suit of charcoal grey wool despite the bitter October cold, his white shirt open at the collar revealing the muscled breadth of his chest. His dark hair was slicked back from his face, silvered at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, the kind that carried destruction in its clouds. A scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, pale white against olive skin, a mark that had healed long ago but never disappeared. On his left wrist sat a gold watch that probably cost more than Sofia had earned in her entire life. He wore a cashmere coat that moved like water when he walked, the fabric so fine it seemed to catch the light itself. Aleandro had watched this woman with one swollen eye and blooded mouth stand against 3 of his men. He had watched her shield a stranger. And something inside his chest, something he thought had calcified years ago, turned to stone, made impossible to move, had shifted. 23 years earlier, on a night when the snow fell so heavy you could not see the streetlights, Aleandro's brother had sold their family to enemies. Not because of honor or survival, but because the rivals had offered him money. $2 million to turn over the location of their safe houses, the names of their people, the routes their shipments traveled. Aleandro had found out when 3 of his men were killed in an ambush they should never have walked into. He had found his brother trying to leave the country with suitcases full of cash and a new name and a new face planned through plastic surgery. The choice had not been difficult. Mercy would have destroyed everything. Survival meant making an example. Survival meant Aleandro had to order the death of his own blood, had to listen to his brother weep and beg and promise to return every dollar, and had to say no anyway. After that night, Aleandro had never trusted anyone with his life again. He had built an empire that stretched from the docks to the suburbs, legitimate businesses mixed with the kind that operated in shadows, restaurants and nightclubs and construction companies that were fronts for something older and darker and more efficient. He had men who would die for him. Tony and Franco, his lieutenants, had been with him for 15 years, and in all that time they had never seen him show mercy to anyone who crossed him. They had never seen him sit beside someone in the cold and simply listen to them breathe. But tonight, as Sofia Hartley looked up at him with her one good eye and tried to step backward, Aleandro had felt something move in his chest that felt a great deal like waking up. "Let the vendor go," Aleandro had said to his men, his voice deep and solid, the kind of voice that made people obey without understanding why. "Everyone clear the street." Tony and Franco had exchanged the kind of look that meant they were witnessing something unprecedented. They had withdrawn, moving like they were walking through water, confused and alert. The armed men had melted back into the darkness. The vendor had run, not waiting to understand his luck. Now, at 1:06 a.m., Aleandro sat beside Sofia on a wooden crate outside the warehouse, the cashmere coat draped over both of them. She had stopped crying 15 minutes ago. Her breathing had steadied into something that resembled normal, though her whole body still trembled with the kind of cold that came from terror, not temperature. "What is your name?" Aleandro asked. Sofia, she whispered. Sofia Hartley. Where do you live, Sofia? She did not answer at first. The fear was still there, thick and suffocating. Men did not help women like her without wanting something. Men with suits that cost more than her annual salary did not sit in the cold with women who had nothing. The world did not work that way. I live on Ashton Street. The blue apartment building. The one with the broken mailbox. Aleandro nodded slowly. He did not touch her. He did not promise her anything. He simply sat there in the cold October night, his expensive coat around her shoulders, and let her exist in a space where she was not being hunted. 3 blocks away, in a townhouse on Beacon Hill, Cordelia Blackwood sat in her study reading a message on her phone. Cordelia was 58 years old, her face carefully maintained through procedures and serums, her grey hair dyed to a sophisticated ash blonde, her clothing always impeccable. She had been Douglas Hale's partner in business and pleasure for 3 years before she discovered he had borrowed $200,000 from her without asking. When she had demanded repayment, he had disappeared into Sofia Hartley's life instead, leaving Cordelia with the debt and the humiliation. For 6 months, Cordelia had been working to undo Sofia systematically. She had connections, a network of wealthy women in Boston who listened to her at charity galas and book clubs. She had spread stories about Sofia being unstable, mentally ill, a danger to her daughter. She had made sure Sofia could not find work beyond the diner, had influenced hiring managers through friends of friends, had ensured that every door that might have led to something better slammed shut. It was small work, really, the kind of destruction that left no fingerprints. And then there was Douglas, who handled the physical reminders. The threats. The hands around the throat. The way he knew where Sofia walked at night, where Emma went to school, which shift she was working. The message on Cordelia's phone was from Douglas, just saw her in the warehouse district. She is still awake. Still alive. Still thinking she can survive this. Cordelia smiled. Sofia would break eventually. They always did. And when she did, Cordelia would be there to document it, to make sure everyone in Boston knew that this woman was unfit to raise a child, that Emma would be better off in foster care, that some people were simply meant to lose everything. Meanwhile, Sofia sat in the cold beside a man she did not know, a man whose name she would learn was Aleandro Castellano, a man who would change everything about how her life was supposed to unfold. She did not know that his empire stretched across the entire city. She did not know that Cordelia Blackwood's network of cruelty had just crossed into the territory of someone who had learned long ago how to dismantle enemies completely. She did not know that in the next 72 hours, everything would shift. All she knew was that for the first time in months, no one was hunting her. For the first time since Douglas had found her again, she was not alone. And that, in that moment, was enough. The rain came down in sheets that October night, cold enough to sting, and Sofia Hartley stumbled through it with one eye swollen shut, her lip split open, handprint bruises mapped across her throat like a roadmap of violence. The eviction notice crumpled in her jacket pocket burned red against her ribs. 12 days. That was all she had left before the locks changed and she and Emma were standing on the street with 2 garbage bags of clothes and nowhere to go. She had counted the money 3 times. $78. That was everything. After the rent she could not pay, after Douglas had made sure she lost another job with his calls to her manager, after the medical bills from last month when Emma had fallen at school and split her chin, there was $78 between her and complete erasure. The grocery store bags bit into her palms. Cheap pasta, canned beans, a loaf of day-old bread she had bought half price. Emma needed to eat. Emma needed her mother to keep moving forward even when forward felt like walking into a wall. Sofia cut through the warehouse district to shorten her walk home. The November wind tore through the alley like something with teeth, and her breath came out in small clouds that disappeared before they fully formed. That was when she heard the voices. Sharp. Threatening. A man's voice high with fear. Around the corner, 3 men in dark coats had backed a vendor against the brick wall. She recognized the vendor, Miguel from the corner market, the one who always gave Emma an extra apple without charging. His hands were up, shaking. "Please. The money is not here yet. My brother is bringing it tomorrow." One of the men grabbed Miguel's collar. "That is not our problem." Sofia did not think. She had learned a long time ago that thinking was a luxury for people who had options. She dropped her groceries and shoved herself between Miguel and the largest man, her head barely reaching his chest. "Stop." Her voice came out rough from the bruises on her throat. He said no. The man stared down at her like she was a mosquito he had just noticed. Behind them, footsteps sounded on wet pavement. A warehouse door creaked open, and a silhouette emerged from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a three-piece charcoal suit despite the bitter cold. Dark hair. Dark eyes that had seen violence the way other people read language. Aleandro Castellano stepped into the alley, and the temperature seemed to drop further. The three men straightened immediately. Their hands came away from Miguel. They did not speak. They simply watched their boss with the expression of soldiers caught disobeying orders. "Step aside, gentlemen," Aleandro said, his voice steady and low. They moved. They always moved. Tony and Franco exchanged a look that neither of them could quite name, the look of men watching something impossible unfold. In 17 years, neither had ever seen Aleandro acknowledge a stranger. In 17 years, they had never seen him emerge from that warehouse for anyone. Sofia stood in front of him, bleeding, bruised, holding up a man she did not know against three men with guns they had not drawn. She did not know who he was. She did not know that this man controlled every illegal operation from the harbor to the university district. She only knew that for the first time since Douglas had found her again, someone was looking at her with something other than contempt or hunger. "Go home," Aleandro said to the three men. "Do not return to this district. Do not contact this vendor again. Consider this your only warning." They left like shadows dissolving. Miguel retreated, murmuring thanks that Sofia barely heard. And then there was silence, the kind of silence that fills an alley at 3 in the morning when the rain is the only sound left in the world. "You are bleeding," Aleandro said. He was not asking. Sofia felt the weight of her exhaustion suddenly. The two back-to-back shifts. The way Douglas had cornered her outside the diner and put his hands on her throat because she had filed another police report, and the cops had done nothing because Douglas knew people, because his money talked louder than her voice ever could. The way the bruises bloomed darker every hour. The way her daughter was sleeping in a room with black mold growing behind the dresser because she could not afford to move, could not afford to fight, could not afford anything but survival. "I am fine," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. He did not move closer. Men like him understood that stepping forward was a threat. Instead, he removed his coat, cashmere, butter soft, worth more than 3 months of her rent, and draped it over her shoulders. "I do not know your name," he said. "Sofia." "Sofia, I am Aleandro. You are going to tell me why there are handprints on your throat, and you are going to tell me the name of the man responsible. And then you are going to let me help you, because what happened here tonight cannot continue." She should have said no. She should have been afraid. Instead, she found herself nodding, her legs shaking beneath her, her eye throbbing, her throat burning, her $78 worth nothing against the weight of his attention and the first moment of safety she had felt in months. What she did not understand yet was that she had just walked into the path of a man who had once chosen survival over mercy when his own brother had betrayed him, and that choice had haunted him for 15 years. She did not understand that Aleandro had been looking for a reason to feel something other than the cold machinery of his empire. She did not understand that the moment she stood between Miguel and violence, something fractured in him, a dam that had held for a very long time. But 3 blocks away, in a penthouse that overlooked the harbor, Cordelia Blackwood received a text message from Douglas. The message contained a single photograph, Sofia, soaking wet, standing with a man in a suit, looking at him the way a drowning person looks at land. Cordelia read the message twice. Then she smiled. "Douglas, you magnificent idiot," she whispered to the darkness. "You have just made the biggest mistake of your life. She did not know that the man in the photograph owned the entire city. She did not know that his reach extended into places that made federal agents nervous. She only knew that Sofia Hartley had just become a threat to their plan, and threats needed to be eliminated. What happened next would destroy both of them. 1 year had passed since the night Sofia Hartley stood bleeding in an alley, and the woman who walked through the doors of the community center on a Tuesday morning in October bore almost no resemblance to that broken girl. Her hair, once dull from months of skipped meals, fell in thick waves past her shoulders, catching the light. The swelling had long since faded from her eye. The handprint bruises on her throat had become nothing but a memory, a scar she chose not to carry anymore. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse, clothes that fit her properly, clothes she had chosen for herself. Her posture had changed too. She no longer folded inward, trying to take up less space. She stood tall. She stood like someone who had survived and refused to apologize for it. The building behind her bore a bronze plaque, House of Hope. Sofia had started it 4 months ago with money that Aleandro had insisted was hers to keep. Though she understood the truth, he had liquidated assets, moved money through channels that made federal agents nervous, and handed her the resources to build something that would save other women the way she had been saved. The center held a food pantry, a legal aid clinic, a childcare facility, and 6 small apartments for women in transition. Every morning, Sofia walked these halls and saw herself in their faces. Emma sat in the learning center, her small hands moving across a tablet as she worked through a reading program. At 6 years old, she had already learned that the world could be kind, because Aleandro had shown her kindness in the small, steady ways that matter most. He came to the house every Sunday and read to her, not children's books, but real stories, his deep voice filling the living room as Emma curled against him, her small fingers tracing the fabric of his suit. He taught her to braid hair. He showed her how to set a table properly. He explained that powerful people could choose gentleness, and gentleness was not weakness, it was the rarest kind of strength. Last week, during one of those Sunday afternoons, Emma had asked Sofia a question that still lived in her chest like a small, perfect stone. "Mama," the child had said, her voice small and careful, "does Mr. Aleandro make you happy?" Sofia had not answered immediately. She had knelt down to Emma's level, her eyes burning, her throat tight. The word "mama" had been so simple, so ordinary, and yet it had contained everything. Emma called her mama now. The child who had learned to flinch at loud noises, who had hidden in closets when Douglas came to the door, who had asked if she would be taken away, that child was gone. In her place was a girl who laughed, who asked questions, who felt safe enough to wonder about her mother's heart. "Yes," Sofia had whispered. "He makes me very happy." Emma had nodded, satisfied, and returned to her drawing. But Sofia had stood there in her small kitchen, hands shaking, overwhelmed by the simple fact of survival. She had walked out of that alley with $78 and an eviction notice with a 12-day deadline in red ink, and now she had a home, a daughter who called her mama, a purpose, and a man who loved her in a way that still seemed impossible. Aleandro's empire had transformed that year, though transformation was too gentle a word for what had actually occurred. He had shut down operations that could not be legitimized and moved everything else into legal structures, real estate development, hospitality, insurance companies, charitable foundations. The Castellano Foundation, established in Sofia's name, had already distributed $12 million to shelters, education programs, and legal aid clinics across New England. His men had watched this metamorphosis with shock and bewilderment. Tony and Franco, his oldest lieutenants, had exchanged looks during the transition that spoke volumes. They had never seen a man dismantle his own empire for anything other than prison time. But Aleandro had made his choice the night Sofia collapsed against a warehouse wall, and he had not wavered from it since. The wedding had taken place 6 weeks ago in the garden of his mansion, on a Saturday afternoon when the October sun hung low and golden. Sofia had worn white silk that cost more than a year of her old rent, but she had chosen it herself, running her fingers across the fabric until she found the one that felt like her. Aleandro had worn a black suit tailored so precisely it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His men stood in neat rows, and every single one of them had cried. They had watched their boss kneel, actually kneel, before Sofia as she walked toward him, and they had understood that something fundamental had shifted in the world's geometry. When he had placed the ring on her finger, a diamond that had belonged to his mother, a woman he had lost when he was 12 years old, his hands had trembled. The same hands that had signed orders, made deals with death, chosen survival over mercy so many years ago, those hands had shaken as he slipped the ring home. "I have loved you since the night you stood between Miguel and violence," he had said, his voice low and rough, meant only for her. "I have loved you since you were bleeding and terrified and still fighting. But I knew I could not ask you to love me until you had rebuilt yourself, until you stood before me as your own woman, whole and certain. So I waited. And I will spend the rest of my life waiting if that is what you ask of me." Sofia had pulled him up and kissed him, and the garden had erupted into applause and cheers, and somewhere in that moment, the girl who had counted pennies for school supplies and walked home in the dark with a swollen eye had finally understood that healing was real. It was not forgetting. It was building something new on top of what had broken you. Douglas Hale had disappeared 3 months before the wedding. Tony and Franco had handled it with ruthless efficiency, dragging him from a safe house in Revere where he had been hiding from federal authorities. The FBI was still investigating his disappearance, but they would never find him. They would find his car, abandoned on the Tobin Bridge. They would find blood on a warehouse floor. They would find nothing else. He had been handed to the Russo family, who had their own debts to settle with him, and he had been made to understand that some violations carry permanent consequences. Cordelia Blackwood had suffered a different, slower kind of justice. Her financial crimes had been documented meticulously by Aleandro's accountants, passed anonymously to the federal prosecutors, and suddenly the woman who had built her power on secrets and cruelty found herself indicted on 17 counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. She had been arrested at her country club on a Tuesday morning, handcuffed in front of her friends, her reputation shattered before she even reached the courthouse. She was serving 40 years in a federal prison in Connecticut, and nobody in Boston society remembered her name anymore. She had become the kind of invisible that Sofia had once been, except there was no one coming to save her. The wind outside the community center carried the smell of wet leaves and distant rain. Sofia stood at the window of her office, with her name on the door, and watched Emma play in the courtyard below, her daughter's laughter bright against the October cold. She thought of that night, the bleeding, the desperation, the impossible weight of staying alive for a child who needed her. She thought of how close she had come to disappearing entirely, becoming one of those women whose absence nobody notices. But she had stood up to armed men with nothing but her body and her refusal to accept the world as it was. And a man had been watching from the shadows, a man who had learned mercy only by witnessing it. At 6:38 in the evening, Aleandro arrived at the center to pick up Emma. He walked through the doors in a charcoal suit, his cologne arriving before him, his presence commanding the space in the way it always did. But when Emma ran toward him, shouting "Mr. Aleandro," with pure joy, he knelt down to catch her, and his face transformed into something tender and unguarded. Sofia watched from the doorway as he helped Emma gather her things, as he listened intently while she told him about a book she had read, as he took her small hand and walked toward the car where Tony waited outside. This man, who had once ordered people disappeared without hesitation, now spent his Sundays braiding a child's hair and reading her stories. She understood now what had changed him. It was not softness. It was the choice to be soft when you had the power to be cruel. It was taking a fractured woman and her terrified child and deciding that they were worth reshaping your entire world for. The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. This is what Sofia had learned, and this is what she told every woman who walked through the doors of the House of Hope, their eyes hollow with the same desperation she had once carried. This is what she whispered to herself on mornings when the old fear tried to rise up. This is what she would teach Emma, so that her daughter would never accept being invisible, never accept being broken. The rain began to fall as Aleandro's car pulled away from the curb, and Sofia stood in the doorway, watching the city disappear behind grey sheets of water. But she did not feel afraid of storms anymore. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.